Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV, radio and online with the stories that matter across the country. The Conservative Party conference starts today. We'll be talking Tory turmoil and what that budget is meant to do for you and for the United Kingdom economy. Plus, growth and the environment. Can we achieve peaceful coexistence? But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has acknowledged the government made mistakes in the handling of the mini-budget, but says she's standing by her tax-cutting plan. Just a warning of flash photography coming up. Speaking to the BBC Sunday with Laura Koonsberg, Liz Truss defended the government's package and refused to rule out public spending cuts. Ms Truss also said the Cabinet was not informed in advance of plans to abolish the top rate of tax and that it was a decision taken by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. The Prime Minister's comments come as the Tory party conference gets underway in Birmingham this week amid economic fallout from last week's financial announcement.
I do want to say to people, I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has refused to rule out real-term cuts in welfare payments, despite saying pensions would rise in line with inflation. Speaking in the same interview with the BBC, she was clear that she's committed to the triple lock, protecting them against price increases. Not ruling out a reverse on Boris Johnson's promise to maintain the raise in benefit payments in line with inflation, she said Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith is looking at it. Merseyside police have charged a 34-year-old man with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of killing the 9-year-old who was shot in her home in Liverpool last month. Cashman has also been charged with the attempted murder of Olivia's mother and convicted burglar Joseph Nee, who was chased into her property. A second man, 40-year-old Paul Russell, has been charged with assisting an offender. Both men will appear at Liverpool Magistrates Court on Monday. At least 174 people have died and 180 injured after a crush at an Indonesian football match last night, with FIFA president calling it a dark day. Officers fired tear gas in an attempt to control crowds after supporters of the losing home team invaded the pitch in the East Java province. As panic spread, thousands surged towards the stadium's exit, where many suffocated. The country's chief security minister says the stadium was filled beyond its capacity. An investigation has been launched, and the country's president has ordered the league to be halted. Ukraine's recapture of the eastern town of Liman is being regarded in the country as a significant setback for Russia. It comes after video shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers announcing the capture outside the town council building. Hours before the retaking of the town, Russia's defence ministry announced it was pulling troops out. The capture came just a day after President Putin proclaimed the annexation of nearly a fifth of Ukraine. King Charles will not be attending next month's COP27 climate change summit in Egypt. It's understood that after seeking advice from the government, it was agreed it wouldn't be the right occasion for the king to make his first overseas visit as sovereign. Despite not attending the event in person, it's reported the king still hopes to be able to contribute in some form to the conference. Meanwhile, the first official photograph of the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales has been released by Buckingham Palace. The picture was taken at the palace as the monarch and his wife were joined by William and Kate for a reception for heads of state and official overseas guests. The London Marathon is well underway this morning, with more than 40,000 people taking part this year. It's the third time the 26.2-mile race will take place in October after it was moved due to the COVID-19 pandemic, with organisers saying it will return to its traditional spring slot next year. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now it's back to Alastair.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So the Conservative Party conference does indeed get underway later. After a punishing week for the Prime Minister, it's difficult to think of a more challenging time for a frontline politician, not least one who might have hoped to have been cheered to the rafters as the victorious new leader. But some in the hall will still think that Boris Johnson should be there, not her. He and an army of other senior figures, including Rishi Sunak, the man she defeated, aren't even bothering to attend. She must have hoped that her radical go-for-growth tax-cutting budget would have been hailed a triumph. Instead, it's been derided and mocked. Interest rates have rocketed, the pound's been on a roller coaster, and key bits of the budget jigsaw puzzle, the sums and the supply-side measures, are still to come. On television this morning, she admitted, and I quote, "The groundwork could have been done better." But on the core message, she gave not an inch. So today we're asking how she, and indeed her budget, can get back on track, if she should, and if it should. Many say it'll be all right on the night. Others say she'll be gone by Christmas. It's that stark. So I've gathered a few friends who really do know about these matters, policy experts, press and PR experts, deft at party management, skilled at presentation. The key weakness in all of this, according to some of my guests yesterday. These are the people who've been in the thick of it before. And as always, we want to hear what you think. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk with any comments you may have on the stories that we're covering. We are also on Twitter and on Facebook, and I'll give you a taste of just what you're up against. William says, yes, she should stick to her guns and hold firm on this tax-cutting agenda. That should leave everyone better off in the long term. But Neil says, do I think the leadership's in the right hands with Liz Truss? Damn right I do. She's handing the keys of number 10 to Sir Keir Starmer. Boom! Let's cross live now to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who is at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham for us.
Yes, Alastair, that's right. We're here, bam, smack in the middle of the Conservative Party conference on the main floor. It's really quite extraordinary. If you were to see our stand, we're right in the thick of it, at the heart of Birmingham this year. And it's an interesting mood. The conference has just opened its doors. Things won't be getting underway on the main stage until a little bit later this afternoon, when we're going to see a pretty solid rundown of events. First, a tribute to the Queen delivered by Penny Mordaunt, and then a number of other panel discussions, events and features of this conference. But it's not just the main floor of the main stage of party conference where the business happens. Of course, like so many party conferences, the real action will be around the fringe, will be on the floor, will be amongst the mood of Conservative Party members gathering here in turbulent times for the party. Clearly, there is a great contingent of this party who is firmly behind Liz Truss and her radical tax-cutting agenda, but it's also fair to say that there is a large contingent of this party who is uneasy about the direction of this party, and particularly about that fiscal statement, that mini-budget, just over a week ago. It's going to be so interesting to see whether this is a party that can come together over the next 4 days, or whether this will be a conference that simply reveals how divided it is. Behind in the polls, but sticking firmly, resolutely to its plan, at least at the leadership level, Liz Truss this week wants to present herself as a woman who's not for turning.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood there live for us at the party conference, and we'll have more from him and from them as events unfold later on in this programme and throughout the day here on GB News TV and radio. So my first guests here live in the studio, I'm delighted to say, Charles Lewington, former press secretary to John Major, and Joanne Nadler, political commentator and Conservative author, who used to work quite closely with Dave Cameron as well. So, as I said right at the beginning, been there, done it, folks. So, putting all of that stuff behind you, let's cut straight to the chase. To both of you, how much are Liz Truss's problems to do with presentation, and how much are they to do with a faulty economic prospectus? Joanne?
I think it's a lot more complicated than simply being about presentation, although she was absolutely right this morning to concede that what she called the rolling of the ground hadn't been done properly. The problem for her is that the rolling of this ground hasn't been done for the best part of 30 years. Tax cuts are just not a particularly popular idea, and you can't suddenly introduce them into this environment without, I think, a considerable lot of work done to explain why something that might sound very sort of controversial can actually have benefits that go into the economy and will help people beyond those people who appear to be being helped simply by the tax cut itself.
Interestingly, on this programme yesterday, Sir Alan Duncan said they've been dying to do this for years, but it was rushed, not thought through, and it's incomplete, Charles.
Yeah, it was. I was puzzled why they needed to do it that Friday. It was the eve of the Labour Party conference. I don't know whether there was some thought that maybe coming up with a tax-cutting package on the ahead of the Labour Party conference would be smart thinking. They have been dying to do this for years. I still think that actually economically a lot of what was announced was reasonably sensible, but the pitch rolling was virtually non-existent. And I think in addition to Joanne's point about preparing people for the logic and good sense of tax cuts, the ground hadn't been prepared about the end of quantitative easing and what's the easy money that we've lived with for the last 12, 13 years since the financial crash, which means that we've all been living in a bit of a la-la land of very, very low interest rates and very, very low inflation.
Yeah, so, and that's a global.
Yeah, global, but actually interest rates were going to go up here anyway, regardless of what happened last Friday.
Back to the cricketing analogy and ground rolling, which is so lovely. You and I have discussed right here on this programme during the leadership campaign, Truss saying, I'm going to reject Treasury orthodoxy, I'm going to be radical, I'm going to do this. She spent 6, 7, 8 weeks of that leadership campaign saying, this is what I'm going to do. So it's not that it came out of the blue, it's simply that people hadn't been prepared in detail.
Well, it's partly that, and it's partly that she went about this, or she and her Chancellor went about this in something of a gung-ho manner, and they haven't gone through the processes with the OBR, etc., etc. They haven't done the diplomacy behind the scenes, and that's partly what spooked the markets. Now, I understand in part her justification for not having done that it can take quite a while for the OBR to fully formulate what their advice was going to be, although they had offered it. And I think it is characteristic of somebody who wants to move radically and fast, but she's already finding out that actually, whilst that might sound great if you're in a think tank or if you're trying to make your case during a leadership election, you have to deal with political realities and you have to deal with the realities of the markets. And this is what's now absolutely so starkly staring her in the face.
Let me shift slightly, but it does actually follow the logic that you've both brilliantly set out. And you are experts in communications, but you're also, particularly you, very, very good on brand. One of the things that is said very widely is that core Tory brand of economic competence, money safe in their hands, as opposed to Labour, has been bust. Can that rebranding be achieved? Can they get back to where they need to be on that core measure?
You're so right. I mean, I've always grown up understanding that people voted Tory because we were efficient bastards. Right? Not because we like to be loved or we necessarily threw large amounts of money around. And I think that our reputation for economic competence has taken a dent. I also think that our reputation for leadership, what you might call solidity and being grown up, has also taken a dent as a result of the Boris Johnson years as well. So Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have got a double job to resolve. I think that they're going to have to be extremely statesmanlike about this. There's a lot of explaining that needs to be done in detail, which was not done ahead of the mini-budget on Friday. We're going to have to start telling a few people the facts of life. And I think one of the features of the Johnson regime was his embracing of cakeism. And the fact that he never really liked to tell people the home truths. It just wasn't his style. Now we have a leader, we have a new political and economic direction where home truths need to be more to the forefront. Some of it's going to be quite unpalatable. There also needs to be a much greater understanding of how we fare versus the rest of the international community. Because the long bond rates in the US and the UK are very close to each other, actually, at the moment. Interest rates haven't skyrocketed. Short term, they did, but now they've all settled back down again. And the rate of inflation in the UK is lower than it is in many European countries. There's a lot of very painstaking messaging and arguments that have to be put, which, of course, don't really come across in the Twitter spat that takes place.
And worse still, and because I've noticed that Joanne was nodding in agreement to a lot of what you said. In a sense, the punchline, which Charles may have been about to deliver, is worst of all, it's not a zero-sum game, but if the Tories are declining, Labour are sure as heck rising. And Labour are sitting there quietly, despite pieces like yesterday's brilliant piece in the Financial Times and Camilla Tominey's piece in the Telegraph saying, look, Labour are well ahead. Starmer is still a work in progress. As my Twitter here said, he's just got to sit on his hands and wait. They are playing into his hands.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
This does not come into a vacuum. Politically, the background is that Labour are on the rise at the moment, and I think quite shrewdly are doing exactly what you say, which is saying as little as possible and letting the Conservatives kind of create a negative narrative of their own. Now, it struck me listening to the interview this morning that we're not just looking at a controversy on the tax front. There's also this issue to come about whether or not you pin increased benefits by the rate of inflation.
Sure.
She very obviously refused to do this morning. So you have this narrative about Conservatives and whether or not they are the nasty party again, something that we've discussed at length before, Alastair, and I think, that's a big area of sensitivity.
Yeah. But we're in home truth territory there, because one of the issues we have as a country is large numbers of the workforce have decided to withdraw from it earlier than they might otherwise have done. And there are a lot of members of the working class who are enjoying enhanced benefits packages and on the margin are not being encouraged to come back into the workforce.
Well,
and that's part of that is a core part of their thinking. We're not talking about slashing and burning benefits.
No, but it's the contrast with the fact that she has stuck with a triple lock on pensions. So the people in the hall this week are largely going to be of a certain age. That's a little unfair. There are a lot of young Conservatives that come to conference as well. But there is a big generational issue for Conservatives, and I think I've not yet heard her communicate how this is going to be resolved, other than through this very ambitious idea of the growth target.
But very briefly, to translate triple lock on the pension thing, the triple lock says quite clearly that the state pension will either rise in line with average earnings, or it'll rise in line with inflation, or it'll rise by X%. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what X stands for at the moment, but it doesn't matter in that sense. Whichever is the greater. And what we are looking at now is the possibility that this government will do away with the top rate 45p in the pound for the very, very rich, but not uprate benefits for the very poor by the largest possible amount. I mean, whatever the economics of it are, politically, utterly catastrophic.
The politics are very, very difficult.
They are.
And I don't, I, again, was mystified why the Chancellor felt the need to announce the top rate tax cut at that moment as well. I mean, I know that there's a sort of revolutionary fervour almost about these guys, isn't there? They want to move very fast. They feel they've only got 2 years to do this. They're making commitments about economic growth of 2.5%. They'll want to be close to that come the time of the next general election. So I think that was why they felt they needed to go out quickly.
I think so, and also they had to put it as part of the package with the energy, the benefits around the energy issue. Which obviously she did have to move very fast.
And we read this morning that there's going to be a big multi-million-pound advertising campaign saying, look what we're doing on energy, look what we're doing on the energy.
And it's interesting that Labour have actually come in behind this. They've now said that they will honour those commitments for 2 years, which they previously hadn't done. So to a certain extent, she's leading on that issue. It's not all bad news. However, there does seem to be a curious amount of political ineptness around these issues, given how...
And you'll both agree that will be very difficult to draw back from.
Well, I mean, I think Charles is absolutely right. She has got to be authoritative. She has got to be clear. There was a moment this morning, I'm sorry to refer to an interview that was on another channel, but there was a moment where she made a slightly glib comment about Kwasi Kwarteng having attended...
Koensberg got the Prime Minister on BBC, credit where credit is due.
Well, I'm sure she'll appear on GB News at some point over the next week. She ought to.
She was very good on the People's Forum.
No, she absolutely was. But, there was a moment where I felt that she got the tone wrong. She was a little glib, a little dismissive. I mean, this is high-stakes politics now, and she has got to be out ahead of it and explaining it very clearly.
Is there an element of Brexit in all of this? In two senses. One is that and let's forget for a moment that Liz herself flipped and flopped a bit on it. We all do that on certain issues, and life's like that in politics. But a sense that this Conservative Party got Brexit back in 29, got the mandate for it, and that gave them some sense of licence that anything was possible. And those that oppose it, be they in the Labour Party, be they in the mass media, are getting their own back on a party that hasn't committed a mortal sin, but a series of venial sins. Is there a Brexit factor?
Yes, there's definitely a Brexit factor for two reasons. The first is that in the campaign, in the Brexit campaign itself, there was a lot of talk about turning the UK into a kind of Singapore of Europe, where corporate taxes could be lower than they were in the European Union, where personal taxes could be lower as well. We could flourish, we could trade, so the argument went, and we could trade openly round the world. Since the referendum, none of that has been delivered. And actually, to the frustration of those on the right, there have been successive chancellors who have not really gone anywhere near this. Rishi didn't go near it, Philip Hammond didn't go near it. And so, in a sense, they thought there was an opportunity to right that wrong. The problem is the way in which it was done has played straight into the hands of those who opposed Brexit in the first place. And, you know, the Financial Times was one of the first papers out there to say, you who voted Brexit, this is what you get. You get reckless economic policies and a falling pound.
I mean, that's part of it.
And that is part of it,
Yeah, I agree that's part of it. I think that there is a very fascinating Brexit element to this, which the politics of which have yet to play out, which is exactly as Charles said, that Liz Truss's interpretation of Brexit is we want to create a Singapore on Thames, as it were. I think Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak took a different interpretation of what Brexit was all about, which was more to do with cultural issues and the levelling up agenda. And Liz Truss has been absolutely blatant in the last week that where necessary, she will bring in more immigrant workers. Now, that flies in the face of the logic of a lot of people who voted for Brexit. And I think this is a clash that's yet to come. And this is a clash right at the heart of the Conservative Party. So, yes, there's a Brexit element in that some of the media, I think, are determined to get her because there's a sort of sense that, that this is the Brexit Party and we want to bring it down. But in terms of the internal politics of the Conservative Party, there's something else going on. And we haven't seen that come to fruition yet.
You've been absolutely brilliant. I'm going to be brutal now for the first time in this great conversation. You've got a minute between you, I think. And the final question is this. Once those reversals of national insurance kick in, once that penny off the basic rate of income tax kicks in, and once people see that their energy bills are not have gone up by quite as much as they might have done because they have got some help from the state, could all of this change? And if so, how quickly? Joanne?
I think it's very difficult for her to turn around the current... the amount of the lead that Labour seems to have in the polls. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. But it hinges on her policies working. And there's not a huge amount of time in which they're going to work.
Charles?
So I want them to work, and I wish her the best of luck.
I think the problem is the scale of the package. I mean, everyone said this is a massive unfunded tax package. In fact, it's not as far as GDP numbers are concerned, it's not a huge package. At the very best, I think it's going to keep us out of recession in the next year. I don't think it's going to do much more than that. So there are going to be no easy gains from this package. On the other hand, I do think that there's a chance that gas prices might come down quite quickly, so the cost of that package will be smaller, and that will fall out of inflation quite quickly. But interest rates will still be going up.
Just a final plug for our mutual friend Liam Halligan, our economics guy, who's been making that final point all the way through. That's the key bit of the jigsaw puzzle. Joanne and Charles, I cannot thank you enough. Utterly brilliant. You've been there, done it, as I said at the top. Honest and candid answers. Some tough love there for the Conservative Party, but great honesty as well. Lovely to see both of you. You're coming back at 1, I think. Brilliant. Great. Charles Lewington there, the CEO of Hanover Communications, and Joanne Nadler. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. How lucky I am in my friends. Lots more coming up on today's programme. These images that you're about to see have flashing images within them. We have to give you that warning, rightly so. The Prime Minister, there arriving yesterday at the Conservative Party conference, admitted this morning that she should have laid the ground better on tax cuts before the mini-budget. Yet she says she's no intention of changing her plans for the economy, despite the backlash that she's faced that Charles and Joanne and I have just been discussing. So we will continue that conversation on Trussonomics with former aide to Margaret Thatcher, Niall Gardner, here in the studio, right after the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly fine with some sunshine once this morning's rain clears from the far southeast. Let's take a look at the details. The north and west of Scotland could catch the odd shower, but much of Scotland will be dry with some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool though due to a westerly breeze. There's a very small chance of a light shower affecting Northern Ireland, although here too most places should stay dry with occasional sunshine. Patches of cloud will drift across the north of England from time to time, but it will generally be fine with the sun appearing at times. A similar story is expected across Wales, where a dry afternoon is on the cards with bright or sunny spells. With gentle winds, it should feel pleasant in the sunshine. Some cloud will bubble up at times across the Midlands, so sunshine will come and go, although temperatures should climb to around 17 Celsius, 63 Fahrenheit, which is just above the early October average. Meanwhile, across East Anglia, Sunday afternoon will be a quiet one weather-wise, with light winds and some spells of sunshine. Here we could see a high of around 18 degrees. This morning's rain will have cleared from southernmost counties of England by the time we get to mid-afternoon, heralding a brighter end to the day for these parts. As we head towards and into the evening, most places will remain dry and there'll be plenty of clear spells. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you,
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio,
and online. We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
and from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome back. It's 12:30. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom with the latest. The Prime Minister has acknowledged the government made mistakes in the handling of the mini-budget, but says she's standing by her tax-cutting plan. Speaking to the BBC Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Liz Truss defended the government's package and refused to rule out public spending cuts. Ms Truss also said the Cabinet was not informed in advance of plans to abolish the top rate of tax and that it was a decision taken by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. Merseyside police have charged a 34-year-old man with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of killing the 9-year-old who was shot in her home in Liverpool last month. Cashman has also been charged with the attempted murder of Olivia's mother and convicted burglar Joseph Nee, who was chased into her property. A second man, 40-year-old Paul Russell, has been charged with assisting an offender. Both men will appear at Liverpool Magistrates Court on Monday. At least 125 people have died after a crush at an Indonesian football match last night, with FIFA president calling it a dark day. Officers fired tear gas in an attempt to control crowds after supporters of the losing home team invaded the pitch in the East Java province. As panic spread, thousands surged towards the stadium's exits, where many suffocated. An investigation has now been launched, and the country's president has ordered the league to be halted. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have retreated from the key eastern town of Lyman. A video shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers announcing the capture outside the town council. Hours before the retaking of the town, Russia's defence ministry announced it was pulling troops out of the area amid threats of encirclement. The capture has come just a day after President Putin proclaimed the annexation of nearly a fifth of Ukraine. The first official photograph of the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales has been released by Buckingham Palace. The picture was taken at the palace as the monarch and his wife were joined by William and Kate for a reception for heads of state and official overseas guests. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's get straight back to Alastair.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So, huge tax-cutting mini-budget, Bank of England chucking billions at the markets to stop mortgages and pensions either grinding to a halt, collapsing or a bit of both. The watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibilities, even offered to give an assessment of the measures only to be told, thank you, no thank you, then ending up in private talks at number 10. Well, this morning, as you just heard in Thames's news bulletin, the Prime Minister admitted the groundwork could have been done better, but she still has no intention of changing her plans. I'm delighted to be joined now by Niall Gardner, who I wanted to talk to about both the UK political and economic challenges and Ukraine. Yesterday, we only managed Ukraine, so now domestic politics. He's a foreign policy analyst, but he's also a former aide to Margaret Thatcher and the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Deep breath, what did you think of it 8 days ago, that budget on Friday?
Well, Alastair, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And I have to say, actually, I was very impressed with the overall message that the Prime Minister was sending, because this is a pro-growth agenda. She is presenting important tax cuts. She is advancing economic liberty and freedom. And I think that she is rejecting this idea of managed decline for the United Kingdom. And if the UK is to restart and reboot its economy, I think that the best way forward is actually to free the markets, cut taxes, make Britain more competitive on the international stage. Economic liberty works, as Margaret Thatcher demonstrated. So Liz Truss, certainly she's been tough. She has defied her critics, but she's delivering on exactly what she promised to do in her campaign.
But you and I both know, and Charles and Joanne demonstrated it a little earlier, that in the real world of politics, you might well have the right idea, the right policies, even the right philosophy, because it's that profound. If you screw up the delivery, you screw up the message.
Well, that's an important point, and I think that inevitably this kind of radical tax-cutting plan and agenda is going to come under heavy fire, not only from the left, but also from wets inside the Conservative Party who are queuing up to attack the Prime Minister here and aiding and abetting the cause of the Labour Party, frankly. Certainly, I think a better effort can be made in the coming days and weeks by Downing Street and the British government in terms of selling its agenda. But I think at its core, this message of advancing a free market agenda is the right one. The Prime Minister should plough forward despite all the attacks. This is not a popularity contest here.
Well, and it is. I think it's important to stress as well the historic context of it, and to go back to the days of Margaret Thatcher and her radicalism in the early 1980s. I mean, Liz Truss hasn't had 300 economists writing to the Times newspaper saying this is all barking mad yet. I mean, she's in choppy waters, but she hasn't sunk yet. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would say that Margaret Thatcher came out of very, very heavy fire in the early days of her premiership, and she was frequently attacked, actually, for her tax-cutting, pro-free market agenda. Liz Truss is facing the same kind of, I think, pushback here, and she has to, I think, project the strength and resolve of Britain's Iron Lady here. And Liz Truss really has to stand up for Britain, stand up, I think, for the principles of economic liberty and freedom. She will prevail if she continues down this path, actually.
One of her Sure. One of her top lieutenants, Simon Clarke, the Levelling Up Secretary, who used to be number 2 in the Treasury, so he knows the numbers as well, is openly talking now about shrinking the state, capping benefits, up by wage rises rather than by inflation, and even more cuts. To be brutally honest, this is the full pitch.
Well, I think it's absolutely necessary, actually. You have to cut government spending, actually. You have to reduce the size of the state. And my advice to the British government is adopt exactly the opposite of what the Biden presidency is doing in the United States, because it's an absolute disaster. The huge levels of public spending there, $30 trillion national debt in the United States. You have the stock market actually crashing at the moment due to the huge levels of government spending that are in place. And what you're seeing in America is absolutely disastrous. Britain wants to go down a different path. This is the right path to go down. You've got to cut spending, you've got to cut taxes, you've got to advance the entrepreneurial spirit of the British people, which I think is exactly what Liz Truss and the government are attempting to do here.
Yeah. And the other side of that coin, as I say, Simon has given his interview and I've listened, I read it very carefully, and it is profound stuff. It genuinely is. Whether it's right or wrong, I think a lot of it is absolutely right. But when you've got people like Dan Hannan, Tory peer, and Institute of Economic Affairs Director Mark Littlewood, whose fingerprints are all over this budget and this approach to the economy, saying it's as much about other matters as tax cuts. The government seems slow to have sold the whole package, the whole philosophy. I repeat my assertion, they've gone off at half cock, and that's damaging everything that you believe in and stand for.
Well, those are important points, and certainly we've seen, a huge sort of backlash to the initial plans. But a lot of this backlash, I would say, has been led by the political and media elites, for example. And I think that it's important for the Prime Minister to stand her ground. I think that it's vital for the Prime Minister to explain all the details, as Margaret Thatcher did. Margaret Thatcher was a huge champion of all of the details here. Liz Truss has to really be the same in that respect and outline exactly how this is going to benefit the British people. I do think the economic agenda that's being advanced will ultimately pay off for the United Kingdom. I think most people will be far more prosperous as a result. These are difficult, tough times. Tough decisions have to be made. I do think that Liz Truss has projected a great deal of strength and determination. She must continue to do so. But at the same time, she has to really outline in clear detail what the plans are all about, the ideological underpinnings of those plans, and why these will benefit the vast majority, I think, of the British nation.
Heck of a speech on Wednesday.
Yes, vitally important.
Absolutely. Great to see you yesterday on Ukraine. Great to see you today on economics, Thatcher, and the rest of it. Niall, take care.
My pleasure.
Safe journey back to Washington as and when that happens.
Thanks very much.
Always get in touch when you're going to be here. Love talking to you.
Will do.
Thank you very much indeed. Niall Gardner there, as I say, from the Thatcher Foundation, the Heritage Trust in Washington, D.C., with his thoughts on the British economy. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including our weekly Rural Spotlight feature. But it does echo an important part of the budget. The Wildlife Trust this week says, in conjunction with a whole number of other friends, that the government's launched an attack on wildlife with the lifting of the ban on fracking and, more importantly, plans for new investment zones. We'll be discussing that next, but first, a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio at 18 minutes to 2, and you have been getting in touch. Thank you very much indeed on our big topics of the day. Top of the lead is, do you think the leadership is in the right hands with Liz Truss? What do you make of the budget so far? Bella says, Liz Truss, straightforward and straight talking on the BBC this morning. Refreshing to have less focus on the optics, I hate that word, but I know what you mean, and more focus on ideology and conviction. Absolutely agree with you, Bella. Well put. Stu says, I agree. She's just stepped up and needs to be given the opportunity to succeed. Otherwise, who's running the country? Elements of the media believe they are. They deny it, of course, but it's obvious to a blind man on a galloping horse. A lovely analogy there, Stu. Thank you. And my other earlier guests, I think, echoed a lot of that very important point. Pam says, yes, Alastair, give Liz a chance. Give our country a chance. And those are the only ones I've got time for now. I've got another 2 pages of them, but I have to stick to the agenda, otherwise we'll fall off the end, which would be a terrible sight to behold. Do keep those views coming in, however, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News, and you can see all of the other interviews that you may have missed either today or from yesterday. All the programmes are there. Now, as I said before that quick break, one of the vital bits of Kwasi Kwarteng's budget, not as widely reported, I think, as it deserved to be, were a raft of new investment zones. The idea there is low tax, easier planning, all sorts of enhancements to help businesses boom in selected areas across the country. 10 out of 10. Until it takes me to our rural spotlight this Sunday. A group of people ranging from the Royal Society for the Preservation of Birds to the Wildlife Trust say that those relaxations might boost business, but they could also irretrievably damage the countryside and wildlife. I'm delighted to be joined by Elliot Chapman-Jones, who's the Head of Public Affairs at the Wildlife Trust. As I said, it's not only you, it's quite a wide range of people. So what specifically, in your view, are the flaws that you and your colleagues have identified in these new investment zones?
Well, Alastair, over the past few weeks, we've seen a number of decisions by the UK government which could seriously harm nature. Of course, as you identified in the growth plan, investment zones, as well as new planning legislation, are part of that. The government say that they're going to try and reduce the burden of environmental rules in these areas. But I'll say our environmental rules are not a burden, they're vital to our economic prosperity. But on top of that, they've introduced a new bill which will allow them to wipe away swathes of our environmental rules. And you might also have heard that the government, which they announced as part of the growth plan, are going to review schemes which help support farmers to restore nature, to restore our rivers and to restore our soils. This was promised in the 2019 Conservative manifesto. The government are now reviewing it. These things are, of course, all crucial to our food security. And that's why organisations like ourselves and the RSPB say that this is a serious attack on nature.
Sure.
But of course, we need to put this in context. Wildlife is under serious threat in the UK. 1 in 10 species is currently at risk of extinction, and almost half of our species are in decline. We shouldn't be speeding down a path to more loss of wildlife and nature. We need to start putting it into recovery.
All right, I introduced you as being the head of public affairs, which is getting the message across. The NFU, for example, on the second point you mentioned there about rewilding, as it were, and turning parts of the countryside back to the countryside rather than industrial farming. They pick up the phone, they talk to ministers directly. Have you spoken yet to the new Environment Secretary, Ranil Jayawardeneh, and said, look, hang on a minute, we know what you're trying to do on the economy, but please remember the rest of this beautiful, green and pleasant land, because even people like Alastair Stewart are worried.
Unfortunately, we haven't. He hasn't yet picked up the phone to us to reassure us about some of our concerns. Instead, he did put out a Twitter video saying that our claims were simply untrue. Now, we'd really love to speak to him to hear why he thinks that some of our claims are untrue. We've seen it in black and white in the growth plan, where they've dismissed our environmental protections simply as burdens. And you're right, Alastair. We are, of course, a nation of nature lovers. It's in our literature, from Peter Rabbit all the way to Wind in the Willows. It inspires our artists from Turner to Hockney. We need nature and we love nature. So we need to start thinking about how we can start bringing our great British wildlife back, because it's under serious threat.
Yeah.
And the things like the investment zones and cutting funding for restoring nature is not the way to do it. We need sustainable development, because economic growth goes hand in hand with a healthy natural environment.
Sure. Here's another thought, because I've nailed my colours to the mast fairly clearly. But I got a tweet when I said that we were going to be having this conversation, and somebody said, actually, there might be a compromise, because if you look at Felixstowe Docks, which is a massively successful enterprise and is doing very well for the UK economy and for the very good people who live there and work there. But it's flanked by two perfectly successful wildlife zones, because the local people, the government and guys like you got down round a table and said, how can we do this? Because we need inward-outward investment, we need inward-outward trade, but we also need badgers and butterflies and the rest of it. I mean, that has to be the way forward, doesn't it?
Yes, and there are some really great examples of sustainable development where economic growth and nature go hand in hand. And that's an important point to recognise, is that we are a part of nature, we're not separate from it. Our economy, our livelihoods and our well-being all depend on it. And those aren't my words. Those are the words of a review commissioned by the Treasury just last year, the Dasgupta Review, which looked at the economics of our nature and biodiversity. And it said we're taking more nature out than its ability to recover. So what we need are more projects like this with sustainable development. And we don't get that if we start removing the regulations which provide business with security, but also protect our important natural environment.
What do you want our viewers and listeners to do?
I think it's really important that our viewers and listeners who are concerned about this, who are concerned about some of the plans that the government are setting out, to write to their elected representatives, their MPs and their councillors, to get them to reassure them that the government isn't heading in this direction. And instead, they're looking to reverse the decline of nature that we've seen over the past 50 years. As I said, we've yet to hear from the Secretary of State over exactly what these claims are and exactly how he's going to reassure us. So I'd encourage every one of your viewers to get in touch with their MP and get them to reassure them that the government isn't heading in the wrong direction on this issue.
Elliot, great to meet you, and I've enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for being balanced and calm about it. As I say, I've made my position fairly clear, which I'm allowed to do, but I do like to have a sensible and constructive debate, and we've just had it. Thank you very much indeed. That's Elliot Chapman-Jones, Head of Public Affairs at the Wildlife Trust, and as he said, if you have strong views, you may be an absolutely rampant enterprise zone person, said, go ahead and who cares about the badgers and the squirrels, but do express your views to your MP, particularly if you live in one of those areas. That public debate is so important. Now, the much-awaited London Marathon is taking place this lunchtime as over 50,000 runners line up at the start, and they began that process earlier today. As I was walking in much earlier, I was passing all sorts of lovely people, from Alzheimer's, autism, all out there, just amazing, doing great stuff for great causes. Starts at Greenwich, stretches 26.2 miles exactly around the Mall, and the annual race aims to raise millions of pounds for vital charities with thousands of spectators. and the families of those taking part also expected to line the route and cheer the runners as they reach the finishing line. Soaking up the atmosphere for us and for you is GB News London reporter Alice Porter, up and running behind you, and I can hear that lovely buzz that the marathon always generates, Alice.
Absolutely, as you were just saying, Alastair, so many people cheering their loved ones on with fabulous signs and just whooping and cheering them all on to the finish line, because my goodness me, don't they all deserve it? More than 26 miles. I was there at the starting line in Greenwich, which there was I'd say the place was a bundle of nerves and excitement to people who were enormously excited to take on the famous London Marathon before it snakes its way across through some of the most iconic areas of London. I mean, here I am, what a beautiful, stunning day in Westminster before finishing on the Mall right in front of Buckingham Palace. I think one of the most striking aspects of this London Marathon has been the number of people who are trying to set Guinness World Records. There are 28 people trying to get records, with people trying to do things such as the fastest ever marathon run, wearing a full armour suit. There's somebody who's also dressed as a slice of cheese. All sorts of fabulous costumes to have a bit of fun, but also, as you were saying there, to raise some really money for some really important causes as well.
I'm also guessing, Alice, if you glance over your right shoulder, I think I saw one medic go by in full Operation Theatre uniform. These are the proper athletes, but you will be passed at some stage by slices of cheese, hot dogs, bears and refrigerators.
That is a risk that could well happen. My favourite is I've seen somebody going round on crutches. I also saw someone in riot gear, and he is trying to set a record. And I have to say, I have worn riot gear for training, and I have to say I barely made it 5 metres, let alone a marathon. So absolute hats off to them. And even more worryingly, I guess, for someone who's not a runner such as myself, is no one can say you're too old to do a marathon, because there is an 89-year-old man from Japan who is running the London Marathon today. So it just goes to show you can never be too old to have a go.
Absolutely. Alice, brilliant. Keep in touch. Love to come back and talk to you again before we're off air at 2 o'clock. And thanks for capturing that atmosphere so brilliantly. And from all of us here at GB News, TV and Radio, the very best of luck to all of the runners there. And do go online and look up the causes that they are supported. My shout out today is for Naomi House, Jack's Place Hospice, because I know we've got a team of runners there, and they're very special people, and it really does matter to us all. We were talking just before we touched base with Alice down at the marathon about wildlife, and we had a couple of emails that have come in. Amanda says, possibly not 100% relevant, but the expansion of the... this was one I referred to. Good. I can now read it in full. The expansion of the port of Felixstowe back in the day, it caused a furore, but now it sits between 2 thriving nature reserves with many rare migratory birds and other wildlife, ospreys this year. So, as Amanda points out, it can work if we can just keep our minds open and try and cut a deal. Robert says Boris Island was canned, one reason being that it affected some bird migration patterns. As a result, we now have Heathrow and Gatwick pumping out noise and pollution where there could be 2 new towns big enough to make a real change to the housing problem. It was balmy. So Robert pointing out there what happens if the 2 sides perhaps don't talk to one another. Felixstowe and Amanda demonstrating that good can come for both sides. Now, you do keep those emails coming in. I still want to hear what you think about Liz Truss and her fortunes and that budget. As always, you can do it to GB News, gbviews at gbnews.co.uk. Am I doing some more on the budget now? No, I've done those 2 on the... that's right. So do keep them coming in, or you can do it on Twitter to me or to @GB News there. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on the show this afternoon as we inch towards 1 o'clock. The Conservative Party conference starts later today in Birmingham, but will the party stand in solidarity with the Prime Minister after a week of economic chaos, the aftermath of the Chancellor's fiscal statement? That's still to come, but first let's take a quick look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly fine with some sunshine once this morning's rain clears from the far southeast. Let's take a look at the details. The north and west of Scotland could catch the odd shower, but much of Scotland will be dry, with some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool, though, due to a westerly breeze. There's a very small chance of a light shower affecting Northern Ireland, although here too most places should stay dry with occasional sunshine. Patches of cloud will drift across the north of England from time to time, but it will generally be fine with the sun appearing at times. A similar story is expected across Wales, where a dry afternoon is on the cards with bright or sunny spells. With gentle winds, it should feel pleasant in the sunshine. Some cloud will bubble up at times across the Midlands, so sunshine will come and go, although temperatures should climb to around 17 Celsius, 63 Fahrenheit, which is just above the early October average. Meanwhile, across East Anglia, Sunday afternoon will be a quiet one weather-wise, with light winds and some spells of sunshine. Here we could see a high of around 18 degrees. This morning's rain will have cleared from southernmost counties of England by the time we get to mid-afternoon, heralding a brighter end to the day for these parts. As we head towards and into the evening, most places will remain dry and there'll be plenty of clear spells. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello, it just slipped past 1 o'clock there. Hello and welcome if you've just joined us here on GB News, TV and radio, and welcome back if you've been kind enough to be with us since 12 o'clock. I am Alastair Stewart and we are into the second hour of our programme, keeping you company on TV, radio and online, with plenty more still to come, including a bit more on our top discussion. The state of the Conservative Party will be digging into the opinion out there in the country, in the real party. We'll also be back at the conference in Birmingham with our political reporters. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all the rest of the day's news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alastair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. Here are the top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has acknowledged the government made mistakes in the handling of the mini-budget, but says she's standing by her tax-cutting plan. Just a warning of flash photography coming up now. Speaking to the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Liz Truss defended the government's package and refused to rule out public spending cuts. Ms Truss also said the Cabinet was not informed in advance of plans to abolish the top rate of tax and that it was a decision taken by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. The Prime Minister's comments come as the Tory party conference gets underway in Birmingham today amid economic fallout from last week's financial announcement.
I do want to say to people, I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has refused to rule out real-term cuts in welfare payments, despite saying pensions would rise in line with inflation. Speaking in the same interview with the BBC, she was clear that she's committed to the triple lock, protecting them against price increases, not ruling out a reverse on Boris Johnson's promise to maintain the raise in benefit payments in line with inflation. She said Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith is looking at it. Merseyside police have charged a 34-year-old man with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of killing the 9-year-old who was shot in her home in Liverpool in August. Cashman has also been charged with the attempted murder of Olivia's mother and convicted burglar Joseph Nee, who was chased into her property. A second man, 40-year-old Paul Russell, has been charged with assisting an offender. Both men will appear at Liverpool Magistrates Court on Monday. At least 125 people have died and 180 injured after a stampede at an Indonesian football match last night, with FIFA president calling it a dark day. Officers fired tear gas in an attempt to control crowds after supporters of the losing home team invaded the pitch in the East Java province. As panic spread, thousands surged towards the stadium's exit. The country's chief security minister says the stadium was filled beyond its capacity. An investigation has now been launched. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have retreated from the key eastern town of Lyman. A video shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers announcing the capture outside the town council. Hours before the retaking of the town, Russia's defence ministry announced it was pulling troops out of the area amid threats of encirclement. The capture has come just a day after President Putin proclaimed the annexation of nearly a fifth of Ukraine. King Charles will not be attending next month's COP27 climate change summit in Egypt. It's understood that after seeking advice from the government, it was agreed it wouldn't be the right occasion for the king to make his first overseas visit as sovereign. Despite not attending the event in person, it's reported the king still hopes to be able to contribute in some form to the conference. And the London Marathon is well underway, having finished for some, with more than 40,000 people taking part this year. It's the third time the 26.2-mile race will take place in October after it was moved due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Organisers now say it'll return to its traditional spring slot next year. Well done to everyone taking part in the marathon. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Alastair.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. 1:05. Let's cross live now to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who is there at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham for us now. Settling down a bit, arrivals, getting ready for the fray. What's the buzz like, Tom?
Yes, it's an interesting word you choose to use there, buzz, because it does feel like there is a bit of a buzz at this party conference. It's a bit confusing, potentially, looking at the media reports and looking at the position in the polls, walking around here, talking to activists here. You wouldn't necessarily feel like this was a party that was 20 points behind in the polls. This feels like a party that is potentially more at ease with itself than some reports would suggest, although this is, of course, just an early feeling, and potentially that mood will will develop as more of these events go on. Potentially, we'll hear more disquiet in the fringe events of this conference, because of course that's where usually the news is made, rather than the set pre-prepared big stage conference speeches from cabinet ministers, and of course that big speech from the Prime Minister on Wednesday. It'll be the in-between moments. It'll be the drinks events in the evenings, and it's interesting to note that one or two of those pre-planned drinks events have been cancelled already. Now, some of these organisers say that's due to the train strikes. There's been some speculation that the cancellation of one or two of these events that are usually more jolly affairs were because it might be a bad look for Tories to be, or indeed for senior cabinet ministers to be, singing karaoke or looking like they're having a good time in the middle of what is quite a tough economic time for people up and down the country. But yes, that'll be where the real news is made, in the evenings at the fringe events. But I have to report from the floor of this conference so far, and of course it hasn't been going for very long yet at all. The formal opening of the conference has not yet taken place. That'll start with a rendition of God Save the Queen and a tribute to Her Majesty performed by Penny Mordaunt. But no, so far the floor of this conference feels perhaps more positive than you might expect.
All right, Tom, thank you very much indeed. And I think that's 4 o'clock formal kick-off, as you say, with Penny and the national anthem. I'll be off air by then, but I know you've been good enough to agree to talk to other colleagues, you and Darren, as the day unfolds. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood there, live from the Tory party conference, talking about the buzz. But despite that buzz, what's really going on? Is the party out in the country really behind the Prime Minister after the economic turmoil that has faced her since the Chancellor's fiscal statement over a week ago? In just a moment, I'm going to be talking to two people whose faces may well be familiar to you if you've been good enough to watch this programme over the last few weeks, as the Tory party decided who would be their new leader and all of the arguments surrounding that. But before I come to them, I'm delighted to welcome back into the studio to carry on our conversation Joanne Nadler, and I'll also be asking her to comment on what those two excellent fellows out in the countryside have to say about it. The first thing I want to put to you is, after you and Charles left, Niall came in, and I think you were good enough to listen to the conversation I had with him. And he said, in response to my point concerning that very, very important interview that Simon Clarke gave, that they are going for the full Monty. It's not just a tax-cutting, growth-driven budget on the fiscal front. It's the whole supply side thing. It's a smaller state. It's shrinking the state, and it's looking pretty fundamentally at some benefits. That's going to frighten the ponies?
Absolutely. And, you know, what we were discussing earlier is that they're already fairly frightened, which is why, as Charles and I were saying, it's so essential that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor go about this in a measured and authoritative way, explain to the party faithful and to their MPs. Let's not forget that the majority of MPs did not vote for Liz Truss, and she is potentially facing a rebellion over these measures before too long when they come to vote on them.
But is it also not possible that out in the country, and you know where I'm going because you know we've got a couple of councillors coming up in just a moment, that actually there is a deep breath appetite for that radical agenda? They don't worry about your brilliant book, Too Nice to Be a Tory. They want to get on with it. They remember what Thatcher was about throughout the 1980s. They do want low tax, small state, fewer folk on benefit, get out there and earn a living. I mean, it sounds pretty brutal, but there is an appetite for that in the country.
I think that, you know, there's an element of conservatism which is about tough love. But I still return to the idea that if you're going to deliver a tough love message, you have to do it in the context of what that is going to achieve for the country. And I think that has been, you know, that hasn't been adequately done so far. I think that what we're looking at here is a pretty complicated set of circumstances, because there's controversy around the economics, there's controversy around the politics, and there's been a failure to communicate. It is complicated. This is not just that the communications haven't been right, because they haven't been. You know, there is a big debate about this direction of travel. And absolutely, I'm very sympathetic with a lot of what Niall said. However, the context was slightly different with Margaret Thatcher, and I think people were reassured that she was across the detail and she understood that people were crying out for that particular medicine at the time. I'm not sure that this is falling in quite the same way now.
Fascinating. All right. Again, as I said, please stay where you are. Listen to what my next two guests have got to say, and then I'll ask you for your views on it. The first of those, I'm delighted to say, is Councillor Paul Bell. Paul's the chairman of the Wellingborough Conservative Association, who backed Liz Truss in the Tory leadership race, but is now a little bit concerned for people in deprived areas. Is that a reasonable characterisation of where you're coming from now, Paul?
Yes, good afternoon, Alistair. It is, because as I said to you previously, I represent a part of a deprived ward, and I've got people who are living on food banks, worried where they're going to get the money to pay their energy bills and where they're going to get the money to pay their rent. And many of them are on benefits, and that's all they have as an income. So that's another worry.
If you see something we were talking about earlier on happen, which is that the top rate of 45p in the pound for the very wealthy remains abolished, but that some benefits, those that you've just described, are upgraded by average earnings rather than inflation, which is a slightly lower measure, will that cost the Conservative Party's support in your neck of the woods?
A simple word, yes. Let's be honest. If you punish those who are poor and worse off and give to the rich, the Conservative Party will lose seats.
But if you also, I've noted that, I'm not dismissing it, but I want to move on to the next point that I put to my other guests earlier, is that before very long, those people who are working within your constituency will find that their national insurance contributions go back down. If they employ folk, their national insurance contributions will also go down, and it's not too long before they'll start to see a penny come off the basic rate of income tax. In a world of balance that wants the UK to thrive, isn't that going to outweigh the hiccups over benefit?
Yes. Now, yes and no. If you've got a small business, you may get the reduction of your national insurance or your tax, but your energy's going up. And you've only got 6 months of assurance that your energy won't go as a small business. But most small businesses employ 1 or 2 people. And you can see that where I live in Wellingborough. There are many small businesses, but they're suffering. Many are talking about going down and shutting up shop. So we've got to help the small businesses. It's no good giving money to the very rich who won't worry too much what's going on in Wellingborough, but it's the small businesses which will support and encourage people to come back to work.
And the package that's been offered to small businesses in terms of enterprise zones, help with their energy bills as well, which was a little late coming, but it was eventually there. Do the people that you talk to, and indeed represent, those small businessmen and women, do they feel that it's enough, or that they still need to have more, or do some of them maybe feel that it's wrong in principle?
I think most are looking for more. They've only got 6 months assurance, whereas we as commercial tenants and households have got 2 years of a cap. They've only got 6 months. And in 6 months' time, the bills can go up. We have fish and chip shops in Wellingborough who maybe are paying £10,000 a year, up to £50,000 a year. How can a small business run like that unless you get more help on the budget for your energy?
Final point, Paul, and you've been absolutely brilliantly clear and honest about the feeling there in Wellingborough, and in a funny way, more importantly, the feeling between your brilliant ears. I really appreciate that. Final point I want to put to you is this, that I had a Labour MP on the programme yesterday who said to me that his people, Labour people, actually they're not that fussed about 45p off the top rate of income tax for the very rich, because it just doesn't impact upon them, it doesn't impinge upon them, but they remain in pain over energy prices. If energy prices start to fall, can that be transformational, Paul?
It could be and it may be, but we don't know to what we know goes on, because if you don't help the businesses, the small businesses, you're going to have more unemployment, more people on benefit. I would welcome the Prime Minister to come and spend a few days in Wellingborough to live in my ward and see what it's like to live on benefits before she talks of cutting them.
All right, well, We'll pass that message on, and I'm sure you'd have an interesting conversation with her and make her feel very, very welcome, whatever your constructive criticisms are. Paul, a real pleasure talking to you. It always is. Thank you very much indeed. And you keep in touch. You're welcome back any time there. Councillor Paul Bell, Chairman of the Wellingborough Conservative Association, the authentic voice of the Conservative Party in the country. Forget the buzz merchants that Tom was talking about, you know, the upper echelons, the media and what have you. That was a Tory talking about real worries at the front line. Yes, and councillors are very exposed to those. They have to deal with those in their post boxes. You know, that's part of being a councillor, and you are exposed, I think, to real world worries in a way that possibly even some MPs aren't. Certainly not people in the cabinet. I mean, I think the controversy about this top rate of tax cut is that it doesn't look right and it played into Labour's hands, but more importantly than that, in a sense, it's the way that it's been paid for. It's the fact that it's an unfunded tax cut, that the government is borrowing to pay for it. That's what really created, I think, the controversy and the run on the sort of the market reaction as much as anything. The other thing that struck me with Paul, and he's always very, very good at it, because I'm not being condescending or anything daft at all, he always describes himself, in effect, as a working-class Tory, and they're the people who won it for Thatcher, they're the people who won it for Boris in 2019 as well. He's saying, forget a lot of the highfalutin stuff that you're talking about. People in his constituency, Tory supporters, are on benefits, and if those benefits do not go up adequately to compensate for inflation, there will be real pain and it will cost the Tories votes. I think he's right. Yeah. I think he's right. And that doesn't mean that quite a lot of what Liz Truss has announced isn't absolutely the right thing to do. Sure. But as Charles and I were saying in the first hour, you know, you have to level with people, you have to explain why. And I think you have to phase some of these things in. I mean, that was the other thing that has really sort of shocked people over the last few days, is the way that everything was announced at once, or at least quite a lot of it was announced at once, and we don't know how it's going to be backed up, what those supply-side reforms are and how they're going to be delivered. So presentation, but also core message, as both you and Charles said earlier on. It's both. Yeah, it's complex. Yeah. OK, Jo, don't stay again where you are. I'm letting you rest a little this morning, but I'm so grateful that you are, because next up is Arnie Saunders, who's been on the programme before, another good friend of ours. Arnie is Conservative councillor for Kersal and Broughton Park, and he is also Deputy Chairman of the Salford Conservative Federation, and there he is in his absolutely splendid library, which I always comment on because it's such a sight to behold. You also backed Liz Truss during the leadership contest. Are you sticking to her and her plans for the economy?
Absolutely. I'm not going to jump ship or change horses now. I think things could have been handled a bit better, the way the announcement was made. Certainly spooked the market. But I agreed with the policies during the leadership campaign, and I agree with them now. I think we need better presentation, but I think in the long term, things will come good. Basic core message of stand on your own 2 feet. The state will take a little less of what you earn if you've got a job and are working your whatsits off. We want a smaller state. We want less spent on benefit. That's what she and Kwasi said in the budget. It's what Simon Clarke is talking about as the next chapter. That's your kind of conservatism. Well, let me say what I feel. I don't claim to be an economist, but I do feel we need to grow the economy. I do feel that lower taxes are the answer, together with help for people that need help, as many do, with the energy. And, by the way, do you remember, I think the last time I was on, I predicted that the mortgage problem would be very, very great indeed, and unfortunately I've proved correct with that. I think you've got to look at other places. During the leadership campaign, the Prime Minister was asked to give examples of, you know, other places where lower taxes have worked, and she gave an answer. Let me give an answer how I would have answered this. In Florida, where, by the way, my son lives, that it is against the state constitution to have state taxes. I think they're the only state in the USA that don't have state taxes. They raise the money other ways through fees and that. And because of that, they've got a really healthy economy. They recently announced an incredible 200-odd million surplus. And it can work. We just need time to let it work. Unfortunately, markets do get spooked. We live in an age where everything is short-termism, even in sport. You know, if a manager wins the Champions League or he wins the Premier League, and then the next season he loses the first 3 matches, he's out. We've seen that. That's how things work today. People have got to calm down. Yes, markets can be spooked. Do you remember the scene in Mary Poppins where the little boy caused the run on the banks because of his couldn't get his 2p? Do you remember?
Yes.
And you remember, I know you're very good with American quotes. You remember President Roosevelt, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Yeah. So my message to the, to the party, particularly my colleagues in Parliament, is calm down. There's not a general election for over another 2 years. I think things will come good. I'm sure they will.
A fascinating analysis there. My final point to you then, and again, it's something that Joanne, who's listening to our conversation, and Charles Lewington and I were talking about a little earlier on, and Niall Gardner underlined it in a big way, that there's a conversation, what Tom Harwood called a buzz, within the grassroots of the Conservative Party that is perhaps a lot more optimistic than some of the leadership, people who get on television and give big set-piece interviews and all the rest of it, and write learned columns in the newspapers. The authentic voice of conservatism is actually a bit more optimistic and a bit more positive out there, and that perhaps you speak for it. Am I gilding the lily, or am I right?
Alastair, can I just say one thing? I know the polls have been bad the last week, although I was looking at some polls this morning. They vary from a 33% Labour lead to a mere 5%. They're very volatile, and they've been so volatile they can swing back as well. But let me talk to you about a real poll that happened on Thursday night, just up the road from me in a constituency called Rossendale, where our new and excellent party chairman, Jake Berry, is the MP. There was 2 by-elections for council seats. Both were being defended by our party. And do you know what the result was? Not only did we retained them with an increased majority. And that's not a poll, that is the proper poll, as it were. That's not an opinion poll. So I think this is, we should really just, again, to quote Corporal Jones in, Dad's Army, don't panic. And I think things will come good eventually.
I love it.
I know you like my quotes, Alistair.
I do. I love your quotes. That's why I love your library as well. But from Mary Poppins via Roosevelt to Corporal Jones in Dad's Army. Arnie, your magic telly, and you're welcome any time here on Alastair Stewart and Friends. Brilliant insights, great honesty again from what the Conservative Party is thinking out there in the land. Keep in touch, Arnie. Love to talk to you again soon. Thank you very much indeed. Arnie Saunders there, Conservative councillor for Kersal, Broughton Park, Deputy Chairman of the Salford Conservative Federation, and a man who will quote any of you into the ground, I dare say. His final point about Darwin and Rossendale and local elections going on, our mutual friend David Henke always does very good stuff on social media about all of these elections that are going on hither and thither. There are 2 worlds of politics, aren't there? There's the world that you and I, hand on heart, occupy, and there's the world that Paul and Arnie occupy. They're a bit different.
I think there are many worlds, actually. I think there are many different communities with many different challenges. I do agree with Arnie that the Conservative Party shouldn't panic. There's lots of hysterical talk about, effectively, people submitting letters and calling for Liz Truss.
Trust God by Christmas.
Yes, I mean, I think the party has to now stay the course. This is the course that she's set out. However, there's a big difference, it seems to me, between not panicking and not taking advice, and not being authoritative and calm and measured.
Yeah. If I may say so, to agree with that point, and that's why actually Paul and then Arnie were the perfect combination, because Arnie was absolutely right. Don't panic. 2 years to a general election, things can and will get better. That was his view. But Paul at the beginning, remember, saying, but also don't forget poor, working class, temporarily out of work people who instinctively might vote Tory, but they also need looking after right now.
Well, no, quite. And that is my point, is that if the party were to panic and then lose another leader, I think we'd be into an early general election, quite frankly. I don't think that's a saleable proposition at all. However, I do think there's some very important messages have been delivered to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor over the last few days, and they do have to listen to those. Now, that's not to say they have to change course completely, far from it. I think they are probably doing the right things, but they perhaps have delivered them in too much of a hurry, what we saw outlined beforehand. And there's another element to all of this, which in a way I don't want to sound negative after the more positive approach that we've heard from Arnie, but if one thinks back to the John Major government, at a certain point, it didn't really matter what the government did. It in fact delivered a very recovered economy to Tony Blair, but people had just had enough of the Conservatives. And what worries me is that we could be at that kind of a point.
Was it John in the car going across the bridge who said a time comes in politics, which I think Callaghan had said before as well in a previous set of circumstances, and there's nothing you can do to change it. The people have decided it's time for a change.
Now, I very much hope that that is not the case.
Yeah, sure.
But I think we might be dealing with things that are sort of slightly beyond repair now, unless the economy does recover to the sort of extent.
Maybe if Kwasi and Liz listen to people like Paul and Arnie just a little bit more. Joanne, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for spending so much time with us this afternoon. You're always welcome, as I hope you well know. Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. We've plenty more to come in the remaining 33 minutes of Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, Tory party conference begins today, as I think by now you know, as well as announcing to members their plans on how they plan to take the country forward. It's also a chance for the party to engage with first-time Tory voters from red wall seats. We'll be speaking to our East Midlands reporter on exactly that next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly fine with some sunshine once this morning's rain clears from the far southeast. Let's take a look at the details. The north and west of Scotland could catch the odd shower, but much of Scotland will be dry with some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool though due to a westerly breeze. There's a very small chance of a light shower affecting Northern Ireland, although here too most places should stay dry with occasional sunshine. Patches of cloud will drift across the north of England from time to time, but it will generally be fine with the sun appearing at times. A similar story is expected across Wales, where a dry afternoon is on the cards with bright or sunny spells. With gentle winds, it should feel pleasant in the sunshine. Some cloud will bubble up at times across the Midlands, so sunshine will come and go, although temperatures should climb to around 17 Celsius, 63 Fahrenheit, which is just above the early October average. Meanwhile, across East Anglia, Sunday afternoon will be a quiet one weather-wise, with light winds and some spells of sunshine. Here we could see a high of around 18 degrees. This morning's rain will have cleared from southernmost counties of England by the time we get to mid-afternoon, heralding a brighter end to the day for these parts. As we head toward and into the evening, most places will remain dry and there'll be plenty of clear spells. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
We hit a little technical problem there with Tamsin's news. We will get back to it as and when we can, but it just suddenly stopped there as you were seeing Liz Truss yesterday arrive at the Tory party conference, and she was going to go on to say that that she will be making her appearances at the conference later on, which formally begins at 4 o'clock. But for Liz Truss, who we've been discussing for the last hour and a half, the big moment is on Wednesday, when you will want to be tuned in to see what she has to say and what our presenters and our guests have to say about it. That conference starts, as I say, in Birmingham today at 4 o'clock against the backdrop of a tense political and economic climate. It's a chance, however, for the senior leadership to meet members of the party while demonstrating to the public at large the direction in which it plans to take the country, in which they plan to take the country. So the party will also be looking to engage with first-time Tory voters, particularly from behind the red wall. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us now from the constituency of Gedling in Nottinghamshire. How does Gedling fit into that red wall story, Will?
Well, good afternoon, Alastair. Just cast your mind back. It's 2019 and like me, you probably had a sleepless night watching those election results, watching that 80-seat majority come in for Boris Johnson. And you probably heard those words that are a bit of an echo now when you're talking about the red wall story, that Boris Johnson appreciated that people, voters in seats like this one, Gedling in Ashfield in Nottinghamshire, Lee in Manchester, he appreciated that they had lent him and lent the Tories their votes, because here in Gedling, as well as so many other places, they are traditionally Labour seats, particularly for two reasons in the red wall story. One is, of course, the industrial past. Here in Gedling, there was a mining community that thrived for 100 years. And then the second word in relation to why people voted for the Tories, it might be seen more towards voting for Brexit than going towards the Tories as such. So at a time when 3 years later, we're looking at the Tory party conference, Liz Truss's first Tory party conference as the Prime Minister, and we've got conversations around the economy and mini budgets and lower taxes. People in these working class traditional communities are certainly having second thoughts maybe about how they might vote in the future. So I've been up and down this high street speaking to the people that live here in Arnold, the biggest town in Gedling's constituency, about how they think Liz Truss is doing and how they might vote in 2 years' time.
I think Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are totally out of touch with the ordinary working people.
I think they don't know what they're doing. I think they're taking a chance and only time will tell. I can't honestly say I understand what they're doing, but something has to be done that's different.
They've gone down a little bit, in my estimation. I like Boris Johnson.
About time they got the immigration problem sorted out. Yes, interest rates, it hasn't helped the less paid. It's obviously helped the better paid.
I don't think so many people will vote for Conservatives throughout the country, because I think what they did there's more people on less than £100,000 a year than over 100,000. So to me, the maths is straightforward.
It's just possible that the government's economic measures will work, but not many people seem to think they will.
Well, this is one of those swing states. It's probably less likely to stay Tory than it is to go Labour. There's only around 700 votes in the majority for the Tory party at the moment, but maybe some of those bigger majorities in places like Dudley North and Mansfield and Ashfield, where there are also big coal mining communities, big industrial communities, those Tory MPs are probably really considering how they can keep people like this voting. Of course, we did see a bit of a taster for what might come in Wakefield, because in the 2022 by-election earlier this year, it did go back from Tory to Labour. That was one of those red wall seats that turned to the Tories in 2019. So it does seem that the winds have changed a little bit, but whether it will change for all of these red wall seats, we'll have to wait 2 years until we can tell, Alastair.
Absolutely. Will, brilliant analysis, and thank to you and thanks to your guests as well. Will Hollis there, live for us in Gedling in Nottinghamshire. And we'll have more on the Conservative Party conference and the issues and factors that influence what's going on there as the day goes on, and indeed over the next 3 or 4 days. The only surviving bomber aircraft which could carry nuclear weapons during the Cold War is on display at the Imperial War Museum in Cambridge. For several days, experts have been working on restoring the aircraft, which has a wingspan of 110 feet. During a photo call this week, veterans relived their memories of working on the Handley Page Victor aircraft, one of the famous V-bombers. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba went along to meet them. Lucky man.
Built in 1959, the Handley Page Victor was used in the height of the Cold War. The bomber was operated by a skilled pilot defending the UK. Now it's the only one of its kind left in the world. This week, veterans who worked on the flight reunited for its unveiling after a 5-year restoration project.
I had some wonderful experiences flying this airplane because it was such a wonderful airplane and because we were in the forefront of the news at the time that I flew it. So I was very lucky, and it's a great thrill for me to see this airplane so being beautifully preserved, because it's a bit of our history. It's a bit of history which is fading into the distance now. So wonderful that the Imperial War Museum are preserving it in this way.
Like Jeremy, Bob was part of the team who were ready to be deployed with the Victor within 4 minutes.
Our job was to be launched or scrambled off standby, rush up to the northern approaches and link up with our Lightnings, the interceptors, and then chase and find the Russian Burs or whichever their aircraft were that were coming down through the Iceland-Faroes Gap.
But what does it take to restore a Cold War bomber? For 5 months this year, specialists worked on the aircraft, led by John and his team.
What we do is try to conserve objects for future generations, so they can use them as a reference point. That's one of the questions we always get asked is this aircraft going to fly? No, we don't fly them because you'd have to change so many components on it, it would cease to be what it originally was. Now, we want people to become, children to come along in 30, 50 years' time to look at something and say, oh, that was the way it was made in the 1960s.
What was one of 3 designed to be Britain's first nuclear bombers is now here for all to see. An iconic aircraft for its shape, now part of British aviation history. Theo Chikomba, GB News.
Brilliant stuff. And one of the other ones is the Valiant, the first one of the V-bombers. And if you pop to the lovely RAF Museum at Hendon, you can see one there as well. Great work there by the Imperial War Museum. Now, you've also been in touch about our big topics of the day. Do you think the leadership of the Conservative Party is in the right hands with Liz Truss? And what would you like to hear from the Prime Minister when she speaks on Wednesday? Russ says she at least deserves to be given a chance. Mainstream media, however, seem hell-bent on continuing their crusade in the belief that only installing a Labour government will do. Kenneth joins in the conversation. Yes, the leadership is in the right hands. We live in a country with a capitalist economy. Business has to be encouraged to pay for the infrastructure we all need. This backlash is all political. I, for one, think this mini-budget, given time, will work well. Russ and Kenneth, thank you very much indeed. Keep those emails flowing in. We've got another 20 minutes of the programme to go. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News. All the interviews and former programmes are there for your edification. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come in that final 20 minutes, including Truss and Kwarteng's mini-budget has faced a lot of scrutiny from politicians and economists. But what about you at home? We'll be discussing the impact it may have on you and what you need to think about and do going forward. But first, let's have another go at bringing you right up to date with the latest news. Here once more is Tamsin Roberts.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
My wrong, we weren't going to the news at all. I apologise profusely for that. We will be doing it, however, at 2 o'clock at the top of the hour. It is now 17 minutes to 2, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. Time now for our Sunday Savings segment, where each week we try and save you some money via people who really know what they're talking about. Now that the dust has begun to settle on that mini-budget, we really wanted to speak to a financial expert on what it means in real terms for folk like you and me at home. What's the best way forward this winter, and how can we best manage our mortgages, our overdrafts, our pensions in the light of what has happened? So, joining me live in the studio, and I'm delighted to say, is Jasmine Birtles, financial expert and founder of MoneyMagpie.com. First of all, did you understand what the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer were trying to do back on Friday?
Yes, and to be honest, I was for it, because I've been saying for ages we need to stimulate growth. Yeah. Because essentially, as far as I can see, we're in a time of stagflation, stagnant economy, rampant inflation. And these two things sort of fight against each other. On the one hand, with inflation, you need to reduce the flow of money. With a stagnant economy, you need to increase the flow of money. And my feeling was that growth was more important, because the last thing we want, I think, is to have the economy judder to a halt, which it could do. You know,
my view entirely, as it happens. And the other thing, as I said to one or two of the other guests, and we now cut to your area, that is your area of expertise, but this is the detail of it, is that when you talk about getting more money out there to stimulate growth, that comes via the reversal of the increase in national insurance. It will come ere long by a penny reduction in the basic rate of income tax. Forget about the fat cats just for a moment. that could have a real direct impact, not only on how people are feeling politically, but what they do of a weekend when they go shopping.
Yes, exactly. The idea is to put a bit more money into your pockets. The problem, I think, honestly, is that right now, even if we had Warren Buffett running our economy, he would have problems, because we've had the most insane amount of money printing. We've had production absolutely just reduced to practically nothing for months on end. So we have a really impenetrable problem at the moment. Like I say, inflation and a stagnant economy. Which one do you go for? So whoever's dealing with it has a nightmare of a time. And whether we have Liz Truss at the top, or whether we have Keir Starmer, both are going to have a nightmare time. And I do agree that we need to give this plan that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss have come up with a good few months at least. Let's try it for 6 months, see how it goes.
Let's cut down to some of the detail then. We also learnt this morning that the government are going to spend an awful lot of money advertising what they are doing to help us and businesses, crucially, on those ghastly energy prices. Folk listening to our conversation now, are there any things that they have to do to make sure they're getting what they're entitled to in terms of help, or does all of it just happen automatically?
Well, on the whole, it happens automatically.
That's a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank goodness. One less thing to have on our list, frankly. So on the whole, I would say it does. The amounts of money that we're being given, the 400 and, the various other extra money that's going to people on benefits, etc., that should happen automatically. But if you think that you're not getting it, absolutely, firstly, go and speak to your energy company and say, I don't think I'm getting it. Can you show me where the money is being taken out? And secondly, if you are on benefits, or if you're retired, if you're unemployed, if you think that you could get more, you should get more, I really would speak to one of the free debt charities. You've got Step Change, Christians Against Poverty, Community Money Advice, Citizens Advice. There are quite a number.
They're free and they're impartial.
Free, impartial, and you might have to wait a bit because there are a lot of people in the queue. But
and for pensioners, there are a lot of bits and bobs to this whole package, aren't
there? Really, absolutely. And again, Age UK is very, very helpful in that. Really, really marvellous. And I'm very impressed. Also, if you are concerned that you might be losing your home, I mean, we're talking a little bit, a slightly different thing here, but a lot of people, whether they're renting or if they have a mortgage, they are very concerned at the moment that they can see the prices going up. Renters are seeing prices going up as well as people with mortgages. Then I would say go straight to Shelter. Shelter, the charity, it's marvellous at this as well. And they say that the earlier people come to them, the more they can do.
They are, Crisis UK is another good one. I mean, there really are some wonderful charities out there.
Yes.
Always great to talk to you. Thank you for that. Positive attitude, but also the detailed nitty-gritty help. Really do appreciate it. Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Now, you've also been getting in touch. Do reflect on what we've just been talking about, but even up to that, on our main topic, Elizabeth joins the conversation saying, yes, I think we do need what was delivered. However, the way the mini-budget was communicated was dismal, which panicked everybody. But we could not go on with the interest rates being as low as they were. It's just not sustainable. Graham chips in and says, do I think the leadership is in the right hands with Liz Truss? No. What would I like to hear from the Prime Minister? An announcement of an early general election. I don't think you're going to get that, but there we are. Always glad to hear from all of you. And Nigel joins in the conversation as well, saying the present Prime Minister is having a tricky time explaining her policy, but it makes sense. But it is not helped by present or former Conservative members of Parliament trying to sack her, having only recently elected her to her current position. Thanks for all of that stuff, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News. My final guest is the entrepreneur and economist John Mills. He's also the founder of the Institute for Prosperity, and he is an acclaimed author. He's just published Why the West is Failing, Failed Economics and the Rise of the East, in which he castigates traditional economics and the teaching of it. He calls for less emphasis on inflation and much more on growth, entrepreneurialism and wealth creation. Intriguingly, he wrote it before Liz Truss became the leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. And I'm delighted to say, as I did, that he's sitting here next to me. your first premise, I found, having wrestled with economics as an undergraduate in the early 1970s, the economic theory is failing, but also the way in which we teach it to our bright young men and women is also failing. When did that penny drop for John Mills?
Well, I think over the last few years, I think we've been keeping inflation down to 2% as our main goal. But the trouble with this is that then pushes the pound up. It makes it more difficult to invest in this country. The growth rate slows up, living standards stagnate, and the economy doesn't grow. And that seems to me to be a very bad outcome. I think it's much more important to concentrate on getting investment up, getting more manufacturing back, which is where productivity increases are much easier to find than they are in the services, and getting the economy onto a growth trajectory which is sustainable.
It's an argument I agree with, but also, as always with you, it is brilliantly spelt out with lots of data and stats. It's not just John Mills rambling and thinking about some bright new idea. There is data there to fulfil it. But I said what I did in my introduction, John, to our conversation, was that it was almost as if Liz Truss had read that book before becoming leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. I mean, even to the point of that phrase, throwing out the Treasury orthodoxy. That could be throwing out the economic orthodoxy. Do you approve of what she's trying to do?
Well, I approve of trying to get the growth rate up. I think that's really, really important, not least because I think we've got some very heavy costs coming down the track on climate change, on healthcare, on social care, on training, on an ageing population, on more military expenditure. If we're not very careful, we're going to see living standards going down rather than going up. So I'm completely in agreement with her that what we need is more economic growth. Where I don't think I agree with her is that I don't think what she's doing at the moment to try and get the growth rate up is really going to work. It's not going to increase the amount of investment which you need, which is the really crucial metric for getting the growth rate up.
That's interesting, partly because I was saying it in the earlier conversations that people, I mean, who in the past you've profoundly disagreed with on certain other matters, like Dan Hannan, Tory Brexiteer in the House of Lords, but also the Institute of Economic Affairs, saying unless you have the supply side stuff, the growth, the entrepreneurialism, the zest for business alongside the tax changes, it won't work. You're on the same hymn sheet on that point.
Well, I haven't up to a point. I mean, I think that all these supply side things on getting patient capital, more infrastructure investment, R&D, I think these are all really, really important. But unless you get the right framework for demand going up as well, it just won't work. And I think the danger that we're in at the moment is that we've got a huge balance of payments problem. It's really not worth investing in manufacturing in this country because it's too expensive to get things made here compared to elsewhere, because the exchange rate's very high. Unless that's sorted, we're never going to get the growth rate up to any sort of reasonable level. And we're going to slip further and further back in world terms, which is what's happening.
Is that an argument, subtle though it may well be, to review the independence of the Bank of England? Because if you want to impact directly on the exchange rate and via interest rates, then Her Majesty's government's got to be able to do it. At the moment, the bank is dealing with inflation, which you say is overdone in the book, but you can't impact on the exchange rate directly unless you control interest rates.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think we need a much more coordinated approach with the government and the Bank of England pulling in the same direction. Clearly, one of the big problems at the moment is they're pulling in opposite directions. I understand why people want to get the pound back up again with higher interest rates to stabilise the markets. The problem is this compromises our long-term future. But what you need is a coordinated approach where both the fiscal policy, the exchange rate policy, and the monetary policy are all pulling in the same directions. And that's really what we've been missing.
Or under the same roof, i.e. the Treasury.
Well, somebody's got to be in charge to make sure they're all pulling in the same direction.
Final point, and it's the second half of the title of this brilliant book, which you've got there in front of me, Why the West is Failing. To me, the standout quote within the book was, and I think I do quote, we beat Russia in the Cold War, but China is now beating us all in the economic war of the 21st century. That's not just money, bricks, mortar and production. That's ideology as well.
I think that's right. I mean, I think we're in real danger if the social democracy can't produce reasonable living standards, reasonable rates of economic growth. but the authoritarian governments in the East can, I think that's going to put social democracy under real pressure over the coming years. That's a real danger.
Actually, you also say another important point within it is that you can have a vibrant economy, and we all desperately need a vibrant economy, but you've also got to have the rule of law and social responsibility. And that would be a complete anathema in Beijing.
I think that's right. If you're going to have a good life, you need a combination of a vibrant economy that's growing, and you need all these supply-side elements, the rule of law and all that kind of thing, equally important.
You optimistic?
Not very optimistic, because I think we're not going to adopt the sort of policies I think should be implemented. And I think we're going to drift down over the coming period into a period where living standards slip downwards rather than go upwards. And I think that's a really bad outlook, one which we really ought to avoid if we possibly can.
I would subscribe to every letter, jot, comma and syllable within that analysis. John, it's always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. John Mills there. And it is a terrific book to read. You should dig it out and enjoy it. That's all we have time for today and indeed for this weekend. But I will be back on Saturday from midday, 12 till 2. Until then, have a great week and enjoy the rest of today. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly fine with some sunshine once this morning's rain clears from the far southeast. Let's take a look at the details. The north and west of Scotland could catch the odd shower, but much of Scotland will be dry with some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool though due to a westerly breeze. There's a very small chance of a light shower affecting Northern Ireland, although here too most places should stay dry with occasional sunshine. Patches of cloud will drift across the north of England from time to time, but it will generally be fine with the sun appearing at times. A similar story is expected across Wales, where a dry afternoon is on the cards with bright or sunny spells. With gentle winds, it should feel pleasant in the sunshine. Some cloud will bubble up at times across the Midlands, so sunshine will come and go, although temperatures should climb to around 17 Celsius, 63 Fahrenheit, which is just above the early October average. Meanwhile, across East Anglia, Sunday afternoon will be a quiet one weather-wise, with light winds and some spells of sunshine. Here we could see a high of around 18 degrees. This morning's rain will have cleared from southernmost counties of England by the time we get to mid-afternoon, heralding a brighter end to the day.